Hey all, and welcome back to Some Dev Dude. And today we're taking a break from the cybersecurity related content, and I'm going to explain and teach about story breakdowns or kickoffs. I love these. These help me when I'm approaching a new task. They make me quicker. They help me gain understanding for not only me but my team. So before I jump in, just to explain what a story is. In the agile development methodology, a story is a piece of work that gives value to a user. But story breakdowns can also be applied to tasks and bugs. I generally just use them for when a piece of work is non-trivial. Say, if it's changing the color of a piece of the web UI, I'm not going to hold a story breakdown. It's like a 5-second change and I'm done. But when I'm approaching something that's a little bit more substantial, I'll host a story breakdown and I'll present that to my team, and then I'll accomplish the task. So why? Why do we want to do story breakdowns? Why do I love story breakdowns? Because it helps with the 5 Ps that proper planning prevents poor performance. It gives you and your team a greater understanding of the task, the changes that are up and coming, and it ensures that you know what you are doing. You know that the end goal of that task, that piece of work, that you understand it. And it also allows your team to give feedback for the improvement of the implementation details. It might be a case of, hey, we've already got something similar to that. You can kind of just tweak that a little bit. But it gives the team feedback, so everyone's knowledge is pooled for the completion of the task. And in my personal experience, it makes you faster. I've recently brought this into my current workplace and my team. And an example one dev gave is he spent half a day planning, half a day writing the code. So it was done in a day. And in retrospect, for a task of similar size, it would have taken 2 or more days to accomplish. So just in his first go of story breakdown, it made him twice as fast, reduced his development time by half. So what is a story breakdown? A story breakdown is where you as a developer go back and you figure out what the purpose of the task is, or you make sure you understand what the purpose of the task is. You understand what the end goal looks like. You understand what the current state is, so what's currently there in your code bases, and what changes do you want to make. And then you define, once you've figured out all these and know how you're going to accomplish the task, how are you going to break it down? Is it you're going to make subtasks to kind of help you track how you're going? Are you going to have multiple developers working on the same story? And yeah. And then after that, you call a quick meeting, basically to explain to your team what you're doing, how you're going to accomplish it, and explain the story in detail. So who do you call this meeting? You, as your team, defines who. So you can include devs, you can include your QA, your quality assurance engineer. You can include your product owner, so the person that defines what you do and has probably defined the story as well. You can include people from the architecture team if you have an architecture team, and security team if there's a bit of a cybersecurity concern. So in my workplace, my team, we say you need to have at least one dev and the QA. You can have multiple devs, but it needs to be one dev and one QA. And that's so the developers can give their feedback and the QA knows what's up and coming in their work stream to test it. So you're holding a meeting, and I will give a quick example and template, I should say, following this, but you'll have a feedback. There may be a simpler way. There may be a less complex way that another developer knows. There may be a more performant way that you don't know about. There may be something that already does what you want. So there might be another piece of the code that can mean that you don't have to develop everything. You might be able to delegate something to an existing piece of code. And the questions that they will ask will cause you to think in a different way. You might be asked, like, why do you want to use this endpoint instead of this one? Why do you want to make this an array instead of an object and a key value mapping? These are all good questions that you might be asked because everyone thinks in a different way. And I'd be concerned if everyone in your team thought the same way and did the same thing, because it doesn't mean you get challenged in your thinking. So the template that I use. So I will write down in a document the story information, which includes the details, any notes, or anything like that. The details I like to use often include uh, as a user, I would like to blank, so I can blank. You'll also have the acceptance criteria, so these are the points that must be met in order to consider this story completed. The current state, so what's currently there, and I would list all of the code that you're looking at to change, so every service, every web client, and then the change state, so what changes are you going to be making, and again, being very specific, can be down to the pseudocode level, and then can include API requests and response examples. And then I'd say if any subtasks or other users, or sorry, other developers are going to be involved, and then any notes. Yeah, an example. This is just a simple example. This is not a real life example. In this example, I would have the story information listed. I would have the story detail, and in this case, it's as a call center operator, I want to log a call so I can send details to those in the field. So the acceptance criteria is an operator can log the following details: the incoming number, the name, the address, and the notes of the call. And that the incoming number and name are mandatory, so it won't let you save the call, unless those two fields are present. And only operators can log calls, so admins can't create calls, only operators can. So the current state, after going back and investigating this theoretical application, is that we have something called call service, which has a database, but doesn't have any table for logging calls, and there's no endpoints for calls. But there is role-based missions implemented on a endpoint by endpoint basis. There is a web client, but there's no implementation details. There's nothing. There's a blank slate for calls. So I'd list all my changes. The first one is I'd create a database table called call, and then I'd define the structure. So again, getting down to the real nitty gritty so people can really know what you were doing. And then I'd list the changes for call service. So I'd note that I'm making a new endpoint, and that I'd specify the payload of not only the request, but the response. And again, getting nitty gritty, using examples here, but showing exactly what you expect in and out. And then I'd make sure to note that I'm going to validate the requester is the operator to add that security-based permission, and validate the caller name and caller number exists, and return what error. So again, very nitty-gritty, very detailed of what errors are going to be returning on validation. And then I'd list the changes to the other thing I need to change is the web client. So I'd say I'm creating a new page, I'm creating a new web form, and I'm making sure that, again, I'm validating not only on the back end, but the front end. And in a security context, that's important because if you only validate on the front end, someone can modify your code in their web browser and bypass that. And the back end is important because it means that you're not allowing that to happen. And generally, if you validate in both, the errors get fed back to the user faster. They don't need to make a request that's going to fail. Moving back on, and then what happens if the happy path happens, or if it's all successful, validation passes the on submit call to the new endpoint. So that's the story breakdown. That's something I'm passionate about. I really believe it helps us to be better engineers and developers. I hope that you've learned something that you might be able to take this to your own team. I will leave a template in the description below that you can copy and you can use. But otherwise, I hope you have a great day and hope to see you on the next video.